All right, the next item on our agenda is the staff enrollment projection report, goal development. Dr. Skinkis and Tim.
Okay, so I gotta, just give me a minute here, please.
No problem.
Get to my page here.
I can show you get it if you need help.
Last year, I completed one of these charts for the board, and being in my first year, trying to analyze our staffing based on enrollment and projections for the future, and using our class sizes and class targets to show that as we were preparing for our reductions and budgeting, a way to kind of predict staffing for the upcoming school year and for March in regards to whether you need to, the spring season needs to be a hiring season or a reduction in force, or what kind of vacancies you'll be experiencing. So this being the second year, we have it a little more refined. We spent a lot of time on updating our process. So the first sheet that you have in front of you and the sheet that's on the overhead, this is our current staffing. This is 2011 versus 2012-13. This previous spring, the spring of 2012, we put in some staffing parameters under my guidance with Principal Bilesma so that we had specific targets. Those targets were class averages of 30-1 for non-lab classes. Those would be your traditional classroom settings. 26-1 for a lab class, so like a science, maybe an applied arts, auto shop, some of those areas. And then 40-1 for non-lab class, which is pretty much band, our larger bands, our larger choir, and our PE that aren't, some of our PE classes. We have a few PE classes that fit into the 30, such as lifeguarding and sports medicine, some of those things. The overall goal that was given to the administration was to keep your department averages at or below the targets, plus or minus 2. So basically, you know, for the department average, if you have classes that are 30-1, you should try to be within the 28 to 32 range as a department average. Classes 26, you'd want to be 24 to 28. 40 would be 38 to 42. The goal was just to try to make sure we're maximizing our staff, as well as keeping an eye on our expenditure of staffing, which is one of our largest expenditures. So the columns that you see in red, that's the change from the previous year, 11-12, into the 12-13. And then the averages are listed above. Now, we have some additional documents that I'll go into further explanation, but for the most part, everybody has met their targets. We were a little off in applied arts due to some staffing issues and some late registrations and some things of that nature. It was kind of hard when we added the additional staffing to put some of those, put an additional staff member into that area, just because of the master schedule and the conflicts. And I'll go in a little bit more into master schedule and the conflicts. Below, this is a chart that Pam reports back to me on a regular basis. And what you see underneath the Excel boxes is just different times that throughout the year as we were beginning to do our staffing and transfers begin to come in and our numbers went up. These are the additional staff members and where they were allocated to. So with the original staffing allotment, and then we added the additional 1.6 that the board gave throughout the summer and August. The second page here, this is the course sizes and number of sections, and you'll notice that we have on the top part course requests for both the previous year and the current year, and then below we have the actuals for 2012-2013. The district was not collecting actuals from that point, so next year's chart will be a lot more up to date where you're able to base course request versus actual enrollment. The problem is once you flip your student information system over after June 30th, when you start your next school year and you input your master schedule in the classes, it's hard to go back and try to hand count the actual course enrollments for the previous school year. So with the parameters I put in place, Pam knows now that on a regular basis she's supposed to compare request to actual so we can see if there's any kind of trends when we're doing our staffings to make sure we're assigning appropriate sections. And once again, if you look at the department averages and the targets, everybody's within their target range. And I want to go into that a little bit early, and a little later in the presentation, but there's been a lot of talk about class sizes being over 30. What I want to ensure the board is that what you can see from this is that everybody's within their department range. But then you'll see us, I did have Pam create a chart for me of the number of classes that we have over 30. And it's about 25% of the sections we're offering out of the 414 sections. But what goes into some of these class averages is that there also might be classes that we ran at a lower number, below 30, or because of the way the master schedule shook out, one particular section might be significantly lower than another section. So just being the laws of math, that if you have a low number with a high number, it helps offset the cost. So some of the averages, even though all the averages do look like they're below the targets and below the goals, we do have some classes that are over 30. The next page, which is the one that says updated 9/25/12, these were the classes that were previously approved by the board. Remember last year, one of the things I identified for the school board is that we had a significant number of classes that were operating with less than 20 students. And I thought that the number of 20 students in a class is a good place to start, that if we had classes lower than 20, that they should have school board approval, because then the board is open and the administration is transparent of what classes we think are capstone classes or courses that we need to still keep running even though they have lower than 20 students in them. So these are the courses that were previously approved by the school board. The number in red is where their current enrollment is, and the number in black is what was brought to the school board when they approved these courses. I know there were a few questions submitted about a few of these courses, so Pam, do you want to just touch on some of these real quick?
Sure. One question was about introduction to TV and why that was considerably higher than what we thought it would be. That was in part due to some the RB TV students and Mr. Prokes who were at the We Are RB event that the 8th grade students come in. They had some great setups there where the students could learn about it and sign up if they were interested. So as a result, the summer program and summer enrollment was much higher than it had been in previous years. And as a result, a number of students who took it in the summer decided that they wanted to enroll in the PM class after school. That's where we saw the biggest influx of students. And so they could do that without impacting course enrollment during the school day. And so that was one question that came up. The algebra block was another question that came up, why that was significantly higher. And that was due to the number of transfer students we had in. And Dr. Skinkis is going to cover the transfer student data in a few minutes. And the majority of those students that came into us in their freshman year had significant math needs, and so they got put into that class. And that we didn't anticipate that large of a number coming in, but we didn't stay overstaff. Remember, we didn't leave the cushion in there. I'm looking at what the other questions were. Some of the others were on the co-taught classes.
Yeah, I will go, so that's
We
on the
haven't done
second
that,
page.
yeah.
ESL courses are always going to be lower. Those are similar to our special ed courses in that we have to provide those students services. So you'll see 12 registered, 8 enrolled, 20 students registered for the reading and writing. Only 3 students are enrolled.
Well, we anticipated those 20 students, but more ended up being shifted in tutorial because they couldn't get the one section we had of the reading and writing. It's very difficult for students, since it's a singleton, to get that. So we switched more students into the tutorial, and we'll need to pick up their English and writing levels in the following year.
The wellness is under special ed, the adaptive PE course. We were projecting 9 to 10. We have 7 students enrolled. The reason I wanted to just talk about co-taught classes is one of the philosophies that was in place prior to my arrival, and I do agree with the concept, is that we provide our special ed students, plus it also is federal law, but the interpretation or the way you implement federal law is different at different districts. But one of the more effective levels is to co-teach regular ed classes with a regular ed teacher and a special ed teacher, and have students who are classified as special ed mainstream in the least restrictive environment with their peers. So we have some co-taught classes. There was a question on Tier 3 interventions, Tier 2, Tier 1. That all refers to response to intervention, or RTI, which is also a federal mandate. Basically, Tier 1 interventions are the normal interventions that a teacher would make in their traditional classroom. As you start getting into Tier 2 and Tier 3, these are more specific handcrafted interventions for students with identified specific needs or disabilities or learning gaps that the state requires you to mandate and progress monitor. The state requires you to implement and progress monitor. And this also helps getting your sub-scores up, your subgroup scores up, and some of those state reports and state test scores that we see on the school report card and that the administration reported out back in August. The reason I think the co-taught classes are important, I know we had a question about some of this in the previous presentation that was given by the administration, and Pam touched on some of this earlier, is although some of those courses appeared high in the previous presentation, I wanted the administration to make sure that we made clear which courses had 2 full-time teachers in there. So although it's an intervention class, one thing that you have to look at when you're staffing is that you're using 2 full-time FTEs. So you have to make sure you fit within a balance of still being cost efficient, but also still providing the interventions that are required under RTI. Now, it's usually a 70-30 ratio, and we had to apply for a waiver in 7 classes. This is fairly common, and all the waivers are already approved. It's just a matter to make sure you have specifically documented how many students have an IEP, how many general ed students in there, and what additional resources are being put in there. So falling under our co-taught model, we're okay with that. Pam, if you want to go into any more specifics, or if there are any questions on the co-taught, you can do that at this time.
Unless anybody has any questions, I think you did an excellent job of explaining what the reasoning is, why we provide services this way. If anybody had any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Okay, everybody okay?
Thank you.
Next page is our classes under 20 without board approval. Now, a lot of these have parentheses after their names, and it will show you. So some of them I wasn't going to include on the report, but I want to make sure that they're keeping the board in the loop so that eventually if a future report comes out and you see a class under 20 and you refer back, you would say, hey, this wasn't on our previous list. I think we only have a total, if I'm not mistaken, Pam, of 4 that were below 20 and were the only courses offered that didn't get board approval. And some of that, those 4 classes, the reason there's 20 is because there's conflicts. And some of the other classes, and this is what I was talking about, I could use Honors English as an example, the 3rd one down under English. I believe do we have 2 sections of that, Pam?
Well, we have, and then there's C-Team English too, so I think there are more than that. I can look up.
Well, the point I think I'm trying to make to the board is that there's multiple sections of Honors English 9, but we have one that fell at 19 students. So that makes the section average 25.5. But a student might come home and say, hey, Mom, I got 32 kids in my English class. And that's where, there's not a perfect way to do a master schedule. We continue to refine our master schedule. We've made huge strides with our master schedule. But there's only so many, being a single high school district and having several unique courses within each department, it's hard sometimes to get a student everything that they sign up for. And our counselors and our administration do a good job with that. But this is what causes some of that offset. The department averages or that section averages at 25.5, but there very well might be 1 or 2 courses with 32 students in them. At the end of the day, the staffing allotment was correct in that it was set up so that every class would be a 30-to-1 plus or minus 2, but because of the conflicts in the way the master schedule is done, it will cause sometimes for one class to run higher than another.
And I can answer the question. There are 4 Honors English 9 classes and 2 Honors C-Team English 9. So I'm showing you the high end and the low end of the 4 classes. One has 32 at the high end, one has 19 at the low end, but the 4 average out to 25.5.
So if you look at advanced reading with sophomore, the first class under English, this is one of those examples of a Tier 2 intervention. if I'm not mistaken, it's tier 2, where it's a specific class where students have been identified as having reading deficiencies or being below grade level, and they need a specific reading course. This is one of those courses that we needed to add. We expected more students to be enrolled in it, but maybe they improved their reading scores or transferred some of those things, but it's not the type of course that we could collapse and use that section somewhere else.
Why are the enrollment numbers higher than the registered numbers?
What class are you looking at?
A dominant number of them.
What page are you on?
I'm still on page 91.
We're on 92, so we gotta go back.
Yeah, I know.
Transfer students mostly, or IEP needs changing. If you're looking at the number of, for instance, special needs, English 9 students, we anticipated 15 by the time we gave you this report when you were approving these courses, and we've had a number of transfer students, so that
Okay.
would account for it.
Like the biology registered 16, but you have 20 students, so
Right.
those are 4.
So this is one of the,
Okay.
you know, as we talk about this is one of the great things about public education in the state of Illinois. Things kind of, remember I've talked with the board on a couple occasions. Really what I'm starting to do for you tonight is already lay out next year's budget, even though we won't work on that till summer. Because we're gonna we're already started registering our current juniors who will be seniors next year for classes. So we'll be done with enrolling students by February. Department chairs work and make recommendations to the administration to consider. The administration tries to put together a master schedule, and by March, you have to notify teachers if they're returning or if they're being reduced in force. So you make these staffing allotments, then you plan out your budget, and then you have to you're guessing on whether or not how many transfers you're gonna get, how many kids are gonna disenroll or transfer out. So we're gonna talk about that. That's why I'm doing this tonight. I'm giving you a staffing summary of where we're currently at. Tim's gonna touch on our projections and how we're looking at both transfer data as well as enrollment data. And then I'm also gonna summarize by giving the board of where I think we'll need to be next year with staffing. So these were the classes that fell below 20, that were not board approved, but most of them are, as you can see, there's multiple sections, except for 4. The next page is comparison of large class sizes, and these are non-band and PE classes. So all those classes that had targets of 40 to 1, plus or minus 2, are not included in this list. So what I wanted to show you here is that out of the 414 sections we're offering, we have 93 classes that are over 30, and we have 25 classes that are under 20. So this could help sway some of that information on the original chart that shows that some of the targets are below the 30 to 1 average, because you may have 1 or 2 courses, for example, in social science, they have 1 or 2 courses that ran significantly lower that we probably shouldn't assign additional sections to when we were doing the master schedule. So that offsets the department average to make it look like it's well below 30 to 1 average, when really it's probably running closer to 30 to 31 average. The other issue that I wanted to show you is that on the bottom of the classes that are, of the 93, 54 of those classes are at 31 or 32. So it's not that they're significantly over. That being said, we do need to watch this, because the goal is not to get closer to 50% balance or having more sections run. This would probably be the max we would want to be running at, 25% being at 30 to 1. And we want to keep an eye on the 26, the 11, and the 2, because those real quickly can become hazardous and work against us in regards to student learning. Some of this can be cleaned up still. We could still make some additional strides in our master scheduling, but there's always going to be some variance in this. So as I continue to work with Pam and we compile these reports and we continue to look at our data, we're trying to make sure that we're keeping an eye on how many students are signing up and actually taking the course or disenrolling, or making course changes. And this, for those watching in the public, this is one of those reasons why we've become a lot tighter on schedule changes, because our largest expenditure in our annual budget is personnel cost. And when we have to have these numbers in by March 1st or March 15th, because it has to be, the staffing decisions need to be made 60 days prior to the end of the school year, you're kind of going in on a projection basis. And if you allow students to change classes well after staffing's determined or into the summer, that could have a serious impact on your budget. So that's why we put these targets in place, and that's why we're watching some of this information closely.
I don't understand on this one schedule, on the top it says non-band and PE classes, but there's a line for fine arts, which I thought was banned. There's a line for wellness.
There are some class, as I stated earlier, there's some classroom courses in those areas that have a 30-to-1 target. Not every PE class is 40-to-1. Like sports medicine's,
So you left off the non-band and PE, or the band and PE if they weren't 30-to-1 or less.
correct. This is only, right, this
I
is
didn't
only,
understand that.
like sports medicine runs in a classroom setting, so it's 30-to-1.
Okay.
So it's on there if it's got a section. Lifeguarding, because of the safety and then working with the pool, is 30-to-1. So we ran 2 sections. You'll see that there's like one with 19 and one with 31. Well, when we had 40 kids signed up, we realized we couldn't do one class of 40-to-1. So we had to run something. That's just an example. Any other questions before I move on? So the next page just is a summary. We have 85.9 FTEs. This is how they break out with degrees and steps on the salary schedule. This is our total staffing cost. So you're going to see a little later in the presentation that we just based on enrollment projections, we're going to need an additional probably teacher and a half to 2 teachers for sure, so that we should expect that our staffing costs will increase next year.
Can I go back? In terms of the policy, is that policy written that you can do this without our approval?
When you say which
Remember we had voted on the policy about class sizes? Didn't we vote on that?
yes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So does that policy allow Kevin to do this based on conflicts? Is there language in there that allows that?
Yeah, we talked about it and said the policy was based on students that register, recognizing it would change later
Okay,
on.
I just wanted to be sure.
Because with the transfer students, it's a big unknown.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
okay.
I think the key thing with that, when we were doing the policy, was just to make sure that we weren't setting ourselves up for the smaller class size, that if it needed it, we would do it, but
Basically, what the reason of recommending that policy to the board was so that after the registration period with the students that were already enrolled in our being the ones we were expecting to come here that took the 8th grade test and signed up for classes in January, that unless there was a specific need because of an intervention or a state or federal mandate, we wouldn't run a course under 20 unless the board approved it. So in those instances where we had over 20 students sign up for a course and then some students transferred out, or maybe there was a failure or they didn't pass something and they couldn't take the next level of class, it fell below, but at that time staffing was already determined.
And I think, Perry, besides presenting the data that's earlier that says the ones we approved, each time there was a presentation on adding staff, they explained that there were new students being enrolled, and we'd have to try to do the best we could with the new staff to stay in the numbers, but they wouldn't know till after everybody was enrolled.
Right. The one thing, I don't want to have you flipping back all the way to the first page, but that's why I had Pam track as we added sections or made changes, and it kind of tracks how we added 1.6 in addition to the original staffing allotment to accommodate transfers and conflicts. And the board has been accommodating to the administration when they have identified conflicts or an increase in transfers or an increase of students that needed specific interventions. And now the next page, this is feeder school enrollment as of September 30th, 2012. And I'm going to have Tim touch on really quick with the enrollment projections. I know there was a question, and I want to just make sure I answer it so I don't forget that. Tim will explain to you how he does his projections for incoming enrollment based on our feeder schools and transfers and some of that. And in the past, Tim was counting on about an 85% enrollment rate, and that included about 5% for transfers. And if you look at Tim's projection for this current school year, it was at 1430, and our enrollment for the state that we had to report on October 24th was 1461. So we were only off by 31 students, and the page after St. Barbara's and some of the feeder schools shows some of Pan's transfer data, as I had her tracking that for us. And at the end of the day, we have a net of about 54 in new students based on students that have enrolled and students that have transferred out. So in overall, Tim was off by about 30 students in his projections. And a good way for the board to think about enrollment or attendance in relations to staffing and cost is basically for every 30 students, it's about a 0.6 to a 1.0 teacher. Because a teacher teaches 5 classes. So if you just use round numbers of having a 30-to-1 average, every 30 students that come in have to take a minimum under our board policy to be considered full-time, have to take 5 classes. So if you think about it just in round numbers, basically every 30 students is another teacher. So if you think about where we were in our original staffing allotment, and that the board gave us an additional 1.6 from March till the start of school, and we were about 31 students off, you can see that we were almost pretty darn accurate to what we were predicting and what we were referencing. Pam, do you want to touch real quick on, I should say Tim,
I
the
just have
feeder
one question.
school.
I just have one question on the enrollment, this enrollment sheet right here. On the Catholic schools and even for the parochial schools, a lot of those maybe will not be in the district. Is that a good way to throw that count in? You know what I mean? Because they don't have no boundaries where the students can go, and you might have, St. Mary's might have people that are out of district going to St. Mary's, but really they live in another district. So
Why don't you explain to the board, Tim, how you do your projections? That is on page 98.
Yeah, if you remember last year when I did the projections, I went back about 5 to 10 years and I looked at what was the ratio between the 8th graders in the feeder schools and then the number of freshmen that we had the following year. That's a combination of the students coming out of the feeder schools as well as the students that are transferring in. And it was pretty consistent. It was right around the 85% mark, and so that's what I used for the projections. This past year it was higher. It was up a little over 90%, about 92%. And you can see that the number really, in terms of the students transferring in this year, the freshmen, the number is up a little bit, but it's only up about 7 or 8 students. So the majority of the increase that we've seen this year in the freshmen has been from the feeder schools. Maybe it may have something to do with the economy, where people who would normally send their students to a private high school, can't afford to do that, and so we're seeing an increase in the number of students that are coming here. So I used 90%, and I used that consistently out for the next 5 years, just to be conservative, to say that it's not going to drop at all. But that's basically, and then throughout the year I keep the numbers going from freshman to sophomore to junior to senior fairly constant, because there are some numbers up and down, but generally you may have one class that drops 5 to 10 students and another class that picks up 5 to 10 students. But overall, between those 3 classes, it's pretty consistent.
Now, one thing I want to identify with these projections is, I know there was a question asked, and I know that same question was asked back when we were doing staffing. Why are we not taking into account transfers on the front end? Being here now for a full year, and Pam having some data, which she shared on page 96, in regards to our transfer data, our administration has done a really good job during the residency process to ensure that students that are enrolling in families that are new to the district have valid residency within the district. And we were able to cut on some of those numbers significantly. And that's what's caused Tim to now increase his projections an additional 5%, so that we can account for some of those transfers in our staffing projections earlier when we're doing the master schedule, so that we can make some sectioning decisions to hopefully try to, once again, even decrease more of those schedule conflicts and get those class sizes down in some of those areas where we have them bordering on or above the target.
Can you,
Go ahead.
I'll wait till you get to page 99 to ask me a question.
99, okay, hold on a second. Okay, so this is the last page of my memo. So basically on all the information that I've provided to the board tonight, this is similar to the memo that I provided to you last year, and this will give you an idea of how we're laying the foundation for our budgeting for the future. And this is also important. Remember, I asked the board to shift around their operational calendar to do our goal planning later in the year, more like January, February, March, because I think this is some of the information that you need to have in front of you, and then we should start looking at goals. The administration presented earlier in September that we've had a decline in some of our math and reading scores on the PSAE test. We talked a little bit about where our current class sizes are. Based on enrollment projections, these are the staffing allotments we're looking at for next year. So now that the board has all this information, I think you'll be more equipped to make an informed decision when we say, hey, we want to put some emphasis on reading and math. Okay, well, here's the staffing that I'm projecting just based on enrollment projections. So if we want to make sure that our math classes or our English classes are running at a lower level in order to improve our test scores or improve those two core areas, you have to assume that it's going to be above and beyond the projections I'm giving you tonight. So that's why I wanted to do, I'm doing some of this now after being through this a year with you and all of us working together for a full year. This is the reason I'm providing some of this information. Where we are at currently is 1461. Approximately 60% of our students take 6 classes. The other 40% take 7 classes. The little chart above that that has the 85.9 on the top and then it breaks down. These are teachers that we have in our staffing in that 85.9 that would not fall into that 30-to-1 range. So when you take our current enrollment of 1461, you have about 584 students signed up for 6 classes. Now that's give or take because we do have about 50 students that take only 5 classes or 5.5 classes. But for simple math, 6 or 7 courses, this is about 60% breakdown. So if you multiply those kids, those credits, 6 classes times those number of students, that creates 3,504 seats. An average class has 30 seats. A teacher teaches 5 classes. So that comes out to be about 23.4 FTE. If you divided the 3,504 into the 30 and then you divided it by 5, it would come out to the same number. I know that was one of the questions sent in. And then the same thing goes for the 7 classes. So we have 876 students with 7 classes, which creates about 6,132 seats with an average class size of 30-to-1. An average teacher teaching 5 courses, that produces about 40.9 teachers. If you add the 20.8 that we currently have, which is department chair, release periods, librarians, special ed, social workers, and counselors, that would give us a total of about 85. We're currently at 85.9. So that just talks about how sometimes the numbers will fluctuate a little bit. Where some students have 5, some of those other classes that we have to offer with ESL and special ed that have to be below the 30-to-1. So based on the simple formulas I put in here for our projections, we're only off by about a 0.9 teacher. So looking at next year, 2013-14, based on Tim's number of about 1,513 students, I added 1 additional required staff for special ed because we've been seeing an increase in our transfer students having IEPs. So you notice from the 2013 chart to the 2014, I increased that by 1 FTE. I have also highlighted the department chair release, as that's something that we don't know how that will shake out in the next contract. But for sakes of being consistent right now as we plan for the next year and we look at goals and budgets and things like that, I increased I just call them the required FTE. If you have a different name for them, that's fine, but I increased that by 21.8. So keeping with our historical trends of 60% of our students taking 7 classes, we're going to be around 87.8 teachers, or approximately increasing by 2 teachers next year. So some of the things that we discussed when we passed the budget last year, that we will see some stability and that we should be able to calm the storm of the teachers who have in the last few years have been worried about positions and cuts and those kinds of things. I mean, just based on if we keep everything as is and with their enrollment projections coming in where they're at, we're going to need to increase our current staffing by about 2 teachers.
Kevin, the board, we went to the West Cook fall fall meeting, and we had a presentation on the core curriculum. And it was told to us as board members that 47 states have voted in the core curriculum. That it's not gonna go away. There were about five board members there. We saw staggering statistics on how the United States is comparing with other countries in math and science and reading, literacy. So do you see in the future, as school districts are required to move into this core curriculum, what we were told at this meeting, and they had the PhD educators come and speak, they said that the core curriculum would be a qualitative shift, a shift in how testing is done and how teaching is done. Do you see a need that in the near future we're going to have to start looking at more classes with less students in literacy, math, and science?
That is a philosophical. I'm under the impression, I've always worked as a principal and as a vice principal, and even still in my philosophy as a superintendent, that you need to focus on two things: the core content areas and freshman year, when you're looking at making sure students are successful. So I think it's important in the areas like math, science, English, and in our case here we use Western Civ. But in those core classes, you want to make sure that you can have the interventions and the staffing accurate enough that you're building a solid foundation for those freshmen. Because once you have a year of GPA under your belt, it's very hard to improve your GPA, and it's also very hard to then increase rigor or take more challenging courses if you didn't have success at an early age. So as we begin to set goals as a board, I think that is something that we need to look at, is that whether or not do we want to commit to making sure that some of those core content areas are have class sizes maybe below the 30-to-1 target. The first ones that will be implemented, I believe, with the Common Core, where they've had the most significance in developing of the Common Core and the assessments, if I'm not mistaken, Pam, you can help me on this, is math and English. So those would be, and that aligns to how the state assesses each high school on their reading and math scores. So that would be an area I would say we would, want to sip through the fire hose, not, try to drink out of it, and then we would maybe identify one or two particular grade levels and content areas where we would want to maybe shoot for lower targets than 30-to-1 as we prepare for the Common Core and some of these things.
So the board is aware we are doing a lot of work on the Common Core already. We have a group of teachers who are doing professional development and getting CEU credit for working on the Common Core and adjusting how they're teaching in their classes. And math teachers just presented a number of those lessons as we articulated with the feeder schools that came in this past week. Today, 7th period, the department chairs all met, and Kristen Smetana led them through a process of looking at the standards and analyzing their curriculum, and they're going back to their departments with a tool in order to look at where we have gaps and where we need to adjust our teaching methods. So we're working and collaborating with our feeders and making sure that what they're doing is going to align with what we're doing. So we're very much engaged in this process and looking at online assessments, because that's how the tool that's going to be used in the future. We have some sample questions, so we've sent teachers to Carol Jago on a day of reading, and she's kind of a leader in the Common Core area for reading and English, and so we're very much aware of this and moving aggressively toward changing our teaching in all areas and in all the elective areas as well, moving in those standards into what we're doing, since there are power standards and standards that can be used in not just the core areas that you think of in math and English and science. So all areas will begin working on aligning their curriculum to the Common Core standards.
I want to, the purpose of providing this information to the board is twofold. One is to show you that we have our staffing and our scheduling and our sectioning under much better control. The second thing is that I want you to write down, I can't tell you to write down, I know you're my bosses, but it's on November 13th, 2012, I'm preparing you that our annual budget's going to increase just by 2 based on our projections. We need to take into consideration that we're preparing for the Common Core, and that very much possibility, the very realistic possibility that come January with the lame duck session, we could get some pension costs shifted to the district. So that being said, although we've made some significant strides in the balancing of our financials and the controlling of our spending and getting things to a point to where we're at, we still need to take all those things into consideration as we plan for the future. We had a bond presentation last week. We need to keep some of that information in the back of our minds, because just on the way our enrollment's projected to grow, you're going to have additional annual expenditures just related to your staffing, just to keep up with the current targets that are in place, let alone as we make changes with Common Core, and if we have to pick up some of the pension responsibility. So we need to make sure that we're accounting for this and we're thinking of this in the back of our mind, because this is what drives public schools, and this is the main reason why we're here, is the education. So we want to make sure that we're funding it and we're prepared to make financial decisions as we go forward.
So Kevin, the chart on 93,
93. Okay.
we have, according to this chart, we have 23 classes that have over 30 in English, 14 in mathematics, and 32 in social science.
Yeah, it's an issue.
Do we have to consider our final number of classes almost as finite, so that if we need more classes in these key areas, we might be forced to give up classes in other areas?
It's could be part of the discussion, definitely. I don't know if you all remember the first time I gave this presentation, there was discussion about the 7 credits, 6 credits, 5 credits. You know, that this is the information I'm showing you is that that's still realistic. You know, right now we have no parameters on the number of credits students can take. And to be a competitive high school and to create students that are competitive on a national level with colleges, if you can afford it, you don't want to put parameters on the number of credits students can take. But you have to start taking that into consideration, and that's why I advised the board to put that 20 policy in place, because we want to make sure that the student population is driving the staffing decisions, and we're not just running every course that's offered. It's based on the number of students signing up and trying to align with that. I have some additional information. I don't have this for the board. I just wanted to make sure, like out of the English courses, the 23 that are over 30, 17 of them are at 31 or 32. So we're close. We're not perfect. But I mean, so if you think about that, we would probably need to add a 0.4 just in English to try to get them all to at a 30 to 1 or lower.
Well, that's assuming that 30 would be acceptable, but if we
Right.
find that we're not making adequate progress under the new core standards, then 30 may not be our target number.
Right. That is correct. So then it would be above and beyond that additional 0.4 I'm saying. So as we begin discussing kind of like where do we want to go, or when we talk about board goals or things, this is where I want to encourage you more, that we got to start looking at long-term of, okay, are we making a commitment to improving our freshman math and reading class sizes so that we're building strong foundations for them going forward? Are we doing it on freshman and sophomore levels? Are we doing it in math, science, English, and social studies? These are some of the discussions that I'd like to see the board engage with the administration on, and after January 1st, bring in some departments and let's roll up our sleeves and start figuring out how we're going to attack this.
Have we heard anything? We were told that on October 31st, the state might give us some indication of a 4th-year requirement in math.
There's been no announcement on that.
Okay.
It's a lot of information, so if you have questions?
What happened to page 94? I think it's a natural point for you to start talking about it. Here we're talking about adding 2 extra teachers. We should be talking about what it's going to cost us.
I did reference to that real quick, that right now we're at about 8.6 million, so that we're gonna need to look at least that number will definitely increase next year. Now, one thing that some districts do, and we did start to implement this year, is you watch the you want to increase the timeline that you have to fill vacancies, which last year we kind of did not have that time, like we were under the gun, but as you try to project better and anticipate your vacancies better, that will allow the building administration more time to get out and recruit the best candidates. And you want to try to maintain those costs to a certain amount of level. Now, something that hasn't necessarily been implemented in the past, but a lot of districts have implemented is that, we have to look at the number of years we'll honor with new hires, or if we want to put requirements on degree levels of where we'll hire new teachers at, to try to keep our incoming personnel costs to keep them manageable.
Any other questions for Kevin?
Yes.
Okay. Tim?
I'm trying to understand the projections and the transfer students. What was our,
Which page, Tim?
well, I said when we got to 99, but I think we skipped 99. What was our enrollment last year? Does anybody know?
End of the year.
1441?
1441 was the
1441,
end.
so we're up 20, right?
Mhm.
Right.
What I don't understand is,
If you take it from 90%, each year's compounds.
say that again?
He went from 85% to 95, to
What do you-
90%, that's 30 students a year, so it compounds. You're talking about the following year? or
No, I'm
something?
talking about just this year's projection, or 20, yeah. If you, on page 97, we say that 91 students transferred in, and 37 transferred out, right? So that's a 54
Net.
net, right?
Right.
And then on page,
That was at, they're different points in time. I think that's the confusing thing possibly. I stopped, all the information I gave you when I updated the actual enrollments of how many kids were in classes on that first sheet compared to how many kids requested classes, I stopped everything at around September 7th, September 10th, around there. And so that's one point in time, because even this week, we got 3 new transfer students. So it's always changing. We had some kids leave and some kids come. So I stopped it, and Tim's numbers might have stopped at a different point in time. I don't know if that's a little bit of what you're seeing.
what, do you think 54 is somewhere in the ballpark of what the net transfers are?
Probably, with what's
Okay.
coming in and coming out. We
All
might
right.
be a little bit higher than that now.
And then if you go to 99, we say that we projected 90 and we had 92% of the enrollment, so we had an additional 28 freshmen.
99, you mean 98?
I don't know,
99 is the chart that breaks down my staffing, where I think we need 2 more teachers.
well, on my screen it shows 99. It's the one that Tim's projection, whatever page it's on,
98, okay.
okay? And there it says we have 28 additional freshmen. And so I had really asked the question originally, because if you look at the other 2 years, you showed net transfers. One was 90 and one was 124.
Right.
And questioning why we don't put some projection in for transfers. But if we had 28 additional freshmen and 54 transfer students roughly, that's 82 students. And if we had 441 last year, it would put us over 1,600. I'm trying to figure
The
out.
28 freshmen are included in the 54, because you had 37 that transferred out.
28, so the net transfers are freshmen too?
Net transfers includes everything, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
Pam,
I
on your
didn't
chart.
break them down by
Oh.
school year. I just,
Okay,
yeah.
that's why I can't.
So that's why,
Exactly.
Tim,
Okay.
if you really look at it, Tim
Yeah.
was off by about 30 students.
So it's the difference between the
projection to
54 and the
actual.
28 then?
Yeah.
Oh,
So we were only off by 30, which is about
got
1
it.
teacher. And now we've bumped it up by an additional 5%, so we're already gonna start including some of this historical data in our projections, so that we would maybe
but we
have.
didn't include any transfer numbers in our data, except freshmen.
Right.
I mean, I didn't know we counted freshman transfer students. I always thought when you were talking about transfer students, you were talking about students who either were here last year and aren't this year, but should have been.
Yeah.
So in other words,
Right.
incoming sophomores, juniors, and
And
seniors.
the thing I wanted to make
And
sure.
that, transfer freshmen were just freshmen.
Yeah, transfer freshmen are freshmen that are not coming from our feeder district. They're moving
Okay.
into the district. And most people try to move children in at the beginning of their high school experience, so we get fewer juniors and seniors coming in, then we would have freshmen and sophomores. So,
Okay.
yeah, they're not, we have all our incoming 8th grade students, which, you know, Tim projects out from the feeder districts, and these are transfer freshmen that just drop in from other states, other districts entirely. And they never took the entrance test
Okay.
with us. We didn't account for them coming at all.
Thank you.
So,
Any other questions for Kevin? Very good report.
This is one of the most comprehensive,
Very, very good.
what's happening in the building reports that I've seen since I've been on the board. And it really breaks down a lot of numbers for us to think forward. And I think you guys did an excellent job in gathering this data and having your historicals and putting this together. Thank you very much.
Yeah, very good job.
Thank you.